tell us all about it. No, we probably better wait for everybody. But may I introduce Rob, who's joining us for the first time today? And
Hi.
Rob, I think there's a little tiny delay on your system, but the fact you're here and it's working is a huge advantage.
Good. I'm happy to be here.
Right. Now we've got about 1 minute before everybody else turns up, I would guess. Olaf, shall I allow you to record the... in fact, anybody who would like me to allow them to record the call today, do please say so. If anyone just wants to click the record button, it should now work. I've allowed all of you to record.
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Now, touch wood.
I'm not sure if I have enough disk space.
No, in which case, don't worry about it. I'm just touching lots and lots of wood at the moment to try and feel confident that I'm actually going to get a recording this time round. I think I've now worked out why there was a recording problem last week, which is, I was just hugely frustrated. I'm really sorry that I couldn't sign off properly and that there wasn't a recording. It was very frustrating. So fingers crossed this time. Hello, John. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thanks. May I introduce Rob? You already spoke, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah, and John and I spoke this morning. John actually gave me some encouragement and some tips on persisting through this morning.
Thank you very much for doing so, John. Now, who are we short of? We're short of Geronimo and Dave, aren't we?
Oh, Geronimo just sent me a text 5 minutes ago. He's in Spain at home and the internet is not working, so he won't be able to join.
Oh, how frustrating.
And talking about that, next week I'll be at a conference having a session at exactly our time. So next week he will stand in for me.
Okay. And fingers crossed we'll have a recording for you. So that should work, hopefully. So Dave, I imagine, will be along when he's along, if he's along. I can see my inbox and I can see he hasn't emailed me. So who knows? So let's get started. Now, hello and welcome to session 2. Our overall topic for session 2 will be how to direct attention and emotion with questions, which I think is a really interesting topic. I think we touched on it last week, but it's probably at one level the central topic about clean language, about working with metaphor, in the way that clean language works with metaphor. I know that obviously there are other ways of working with metaphor in a change situation, but the stuff that I talk about tends to focus on questioning and listening, and the reason for questioning and listening is this whole thing about directing attention. So that's going to be a central theme of today's session. We're also going to be talking about safety procedures when working with metaphor. Again, lots of people do this stuff in different ways. For me, there are certain safety precautions that I put in place when I'm working with somebody, and I think it's worth talking about those towards the beginning of the program rather than leaving them to the end when you might already have discovered that you needed them. So those are two of our key themes today. But before we get into that, I really want to review what you guys have been doing in terms of homework over the last week. And that's not just because I'm excited about it and I'm nosy and curious, but also because I think it provides an opportunity for everybody to learn from everybody else's experience. Plus, it provides us with another opportunity to ask lots of clean language questions to clarify what people are saying. So as people tell their stories of what's happened in the last week, do please feel free to dive in with a question or two, the lazy Jedi questions particularly, so you have a chance to practice them. So if somebody says, well, I had a great time using the clean language questions, what kind of great time? Is there anything else about that great time? And so on and so forth. does that sound like a straightforward and sensible way of getting started today? And are there any questions about that before we get going?
Nope.
Okay, so
Sounds clear.
great, thank you. So Olaf almost started telling us a moment ago what happened this morning at the beginning of the training he's just been running today. So we're going to have to hear that story first. Olaf, what just happened?
There are 15 people. There were 50 people in the room in the morning, about 10 of which were going to participate in the training. Mm-hmm. And the larger size of the group was due to the wish of the client to set expectations with more people. And there was also a sharing tonight with those people who did not participate the whole day. Mm-hmm. And I had this idea to just use your leading questions from last week. If this workshop goes as you wish, goes as you would like, what would it be like? And I did it in German. That's why I just question. And the way I started was I asked one of the participants, who happened to have started to talk about his expectations just 5 minutes before. So I had an easy choice of a victim. And I knew him, so I knew that it was safe to explore this new method with him. And he totally stayed in the realistic space, so he didn't go into metaphor. And then he asked me, and I immediately went into metaphor so that I had both examples. And then I could explain that those two questions can be used for just clarification and to dive into a metaphor. And the feedback I got afterwards was great. So the expectations we gathered were deep and interesting and surprising sometimes. And multiple people said that they felt listened to in a way that was great and unusual.
So how did you structure it? Did you do...
Sorry, I forgot that. So I started with these two examples, and then I asked them to work in pairs for 5 minutes each. So they had 10 minutes, and I gave a signal after 5 minutes to switch. So every person had 5 minutes to ask the questions and be asked their wishes for the day.
Wow, well done.
Thank you.
Who's got questions for Olaf? Ideally clean questions, but any questions? I'm curious, what kind of deep, when it was quite deep, what kind of deep was that?
People were putting forward words. So the workshop was basically about requirements engineering. Mm-hmm. And one of them said that an interesting topic to talk about would be the word sensible. What is a sensible requirement? And he said, we've always used this word to critique what our clients are wishing for, to say, oh, this is not sensible. They haven't thought this through, etc. And we never talked about what we actually mean by sensible. And he only had that insight because somebody asked him what kind of sensible. And there was another word. So there were two examples of exactly this pattern. And that was brilliant.
And then what happened with sensible during the rest of the day?
We had it on the list of topics. And we were reflecting on the topics we had covered and had not covered just before we ended today. And people said that multiple conversations during the day answered the question of what is a sensible requirement and what is not a sensible requirement. So they kind of had an additional insight they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Thank you. Anyone else got questions for Olaf?
Let me ask, was sensical, was it like a paring down?
The pairing was just at the beginning for this one exercise with the expectations and the clean questions. There was
that's not what I meant by pairing. I meant slicing or cutting down in terms of making sensicles smaller. What is and what isn't sensical?
I don't understand your question. What do you mean by cutting down?
Making smaller. Like if you start with a whole apple and say that that's what sensical is, you might cut it in half or quarters and say, well, this part is good, fits, and this part doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense now?
Now I understand what you mean by cutting down. And could you repeat your question?
Was sensical made more specific by cutting down?
Yes. So people knew what meaning sensible had in the context of requirements after the day. They all agreed they didn't know in the morning. Yes.
Thank you.
I'm interested
Can I ask something?
Go ahead, Jackie.
So I'm not sure whether I've got the kind of flow of events right here. So you asked a clean question about sensible. What kind of sensible is that sensible? Am I right so far?
Mm-hmm.
So and then
I asked somebody was within the context of the exercise. Somebody used the word sensible, and his partner asked him, "What kind of sensible is that sensible?"
Yeah.
So after these 10 minutes, after they talked in pairs, I asked them what were your insights? What were your wishes that you uncovered? And we collected the wishes and the topics on a board. Yeah. And one of the wishes they had was, we want to clarify what we mean by sensible. And that was triggered by that clean question in the exercise.
Yeah. So, and they did that in pairs, did they?
Yes.
So each person in a pair, and there'll be several pairs, generated what sensible meant to them. So metaphorically. So how did you then get them to get some commonality? Because you see, you get very divergent answers because sensible will mean something different to everyone. They'll all have their own metaphors. So how did you then put it all back together to get some agreement amongst everyone?
We didn't. We didn't. So maybe I forgot something. So in the morning we had the short exercise with clean language with the two gender questions, just on the expectations for the day.
Ah, right.
And that led to sensible be on the list of topics for the day. And we didn't do anything on that. We didn't set aside time for that. We just happened to clarify for apparently most people in the room by doing other exercises that I had planned.
I'm with you.
What sensible meant to them. So there were two specific things I did in terms of requirement gathering and having conversations with the customer. And that helped them clarify what sensible means.
Fantastic. That sounds great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you for some excellent questions. Now, John and Olaf, can I just go back to your interaction of a couple of minutes ago? Because I'm curious about what happened there. Where, John, you asked a question which Olaf could not understand. And I'm pretty sure this is not a language thing. What I think I heard happen was a clash of metaphors, if you see what I mean. And I think this might be instructive to other people to tease this out a little bit, if you guys are willing to play for a moment.
Sure.
You okay with that, John? Yeah. So what I think, so John, you asked what I would describe as a closed question about what I think you heard the word sensible as sensical.
Mm-hmm.
And you were asking, was it a cutting down of sensical that happened? And Olaf just looked at you baffled. How can sensical be cut down?
Right. I think I was thinking in terms of, well, I used the word pair, which was confusing because there's that double meaning.
Mm.
And to me, that's another word for to slice or cut.
Mm-hmm. So to use sensical... Sorry, go on.
It was probably a clash of metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about what's something that's whole, and sensical obviously is going to mean different things to different people because it's not a specific, kind of a word. So I just used that. What came to mind was like an apple, cutting an apple into different parts, and then maybe some parts or you'd be cutting a sensical into different parts, or to make them more specific as to what might be sensical to one person might not be to another. And since I think you said this was about engineering, was your audience engineering?
Yes.
Okay. See, that's something
that engineers, but close. Yeah.
That would be specific, and I don't know what more to say right now.
Mm-hmm. So what I think just to play back what I think I've just heard, for you, John, a sensical is something a bit like an apple, which can be cut down, pared down to become more specific.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you asked Olaf in those terms about sensical, I'm going to guess, Olaf, for you, a sensible is not like an apple.
No.
A sensible for you is like what? Or even sensible, because you didn't even say sensible. So sensible for you is like what?
Something that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Something that makes sense.
Apple does make sense in a way, but that's not the way I would describe an apple.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps it's a more abstract concept, and it probably doesn't have the property that it can be cut down.
Yes.
Or pared down. That's not one of the things that you can do with sensible.
Right.
And the point about...
That's why I didn't understand his question. You observed that very, very correctly.
And the point about drawing attention to this is that it's a really beautiful illustration of the value of the clean language questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are designed to not include the questioner's own metaphors, you don't get this clash thing. You don't get the feeling of cross purposes. What you typically get when somebody is asked the clean language questions is a sense of being deeply understood. Even though the questioner doesn't in fact understand what the other person's saying, they think you understand them. It's a bit of a con in some regards, but it definitely helps people to feel deeply understood. Does that make sense?
Totally.
John, how's that sitting with you?
I think that's good. I still don't know what sensical means in terms of engineering. I don't know what it's like. But when Rob and I talked, we talked on the phone when we did homework, one of the parts of what it is for me to learn is, well, some of it's curiosity and looking at things and hands-on, but a little bit of it is confusion as well. Because if I'm have a sense of confusion, it means that I don't understand completely what might be going on. It'd be kind of like looking through a window and having the blinds half shut.
Mm. And that's when you're learning at your best. It's like
That's when I'm learning at my best. Because I need some additional information. I might need to open those blinds up a little bit more, or even if it's asking a question, which in this instance didn't make sense, particularly for Olaf.
So tell me more about how you and Rob practiced together. How did that go? What did you notice when you did your practice?
I thought it went very well.
And what did you discover when you were asked the questions?
That there's more exploring that I can do. I have to take things out of this little treasure bag and look at things and make a decision as to whether this is something is this actually a treasure? Or is this something that's just left over that I need to discard? And the thing about confusion was also helpful, because it helps me. It puts me in a position where I can ask questions and need to find out more about what a person might be saying.
So who's got some questions for John about what he experienced? 1 or 2 questions would be nice.
So you mentioned, I think, confusion, John. What kind of confusion is that confusion?
It's kind of like a challenging, I guess it's sort of like a challenge to myself. Do I understand something? Or do I understand this?
Yeah. Yeah. And anything else about that, John?
Well, it's kind of like just, it's like the opening of the blinds or raising the blinds where I can see more clearly what someone else is saying.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And that's, this is not clean, but that sounds quite empowering to have that knowledge.
Is that a question?
It's a statement, actually, because when I did mine with John, I think we both really learned ourselves and the way we learn, and that was really empowering. You know, there's a couple of things that stood out for me, and in eliciting John's almost his strategy really for learning. It's very empowering to know what you need, and so I was curious about whether that knowledge was empowering for you in that way.
Well, just to me, it's because if I don't have that, I really am not learning anything, because everything is going through the same filters, and I think I know something when I don't.
Yeah.
I'm still understanding. If I'm still understanding something in the same way and don't have a more complete understanding, whether it's, whether it deals with my assumptions or whatever, if I don't, then I'm really not learning anything.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Jackie, it was empowering for you. Is there anything else about what happened when you were asked the questions?
I think the deeper we got into the metaphor, the richer the learning. It was right at the end I got my richest learning, and I still haven't quite worked it out. It almost has a dream-like. There's aspects of it I haven't quite worked out. So, for example, I I talked about when I'm learning, it's like in a flow, like a river. And I worked out that rather than the flow kind of being outside of me, I was almost part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I was curious. I'm still curious about what that means, actually. But another thing that was really significant that I hadn't realised, that sometimes I need to step out of that kind of, probably mixing my metaphors here. Sometimes I need to step out of that flow and take stock and just kind of work it all out before I can step back in again. So that was quite empowering. You know, when I'm learning, I fire on all cylinders. Sometimes that becomes overwhelming and I do need to step back and take stock. So how many metaphors did you count in those sentences?
What kind of stock is that stock?
That stock is almost making space. I don't even know whether that's right, for myself to think. Stopping in order to think, because I don't stop very often. So it's stepping back from and stopping, allowing myself to think.
Thank you.
Rob, do you have a question for Jackie?
I don't know. I'm having some noise issues, so I'm trying to be on mute.
Uh-huh. Okay. While you're unmuted, Rob, what happened when you were practicing? Is there anything to report?
I noticed how, for me, there's a control aspect of learning. I feel in control of myself and my environment when learning at my best.
Mm-hmm.
And my metaphor was driving a fine-tuned car up and down a windy, hilly mountain road with feeling connected to the road and anticipating the next turn or the next bump in the road just in time, it all flowing together. So there was an element of being connected and in control that I hadn't connected with learning before, especially the in control part.
Mm. And when in control and you're having issues with noise and dogs barking in the background, I suppose this isn't your ideal learning environment, which is a guess I'm making on your behalf. And of course, I haven't heard you say that, but I'm drawing these conclusions based on what you have said. So, yeah, so I this is me edging away from clean and thinking, actually, what can I assume that's going on here and that's not going on here? It's a safe assumption.
You can assume I'm... Go ahead, John.
The thing that fascinated me about when I was talking with Rob is, to him, when he had that state, it was nearly like, I thought was like, the way he described it, it was nearly effortless. And he said, well, it really wasn't effortless because he had to pay attention, but that the information just flowed very smoothly.
Mm-hmm. And when it's nearly effortless like that for Rob, is that similar or different to how you do your learning at your best, John?
And that's a question for me?
It was actually a question for John, but I'm curious in what anyone's got to say about that.
So you're asking us whether we can relate to that effortless?
I suppose I'm wondering, do you think when you hear about Rob's metaphor, is that the same or different to how you do your learning at your best?
I could relate to something that Rob said a minute ago, and it was something like at the last minute, pulling it all together, something like that. Can you relate to that, Rob?
Mine, in terms of timing, it would be just all comes together at the same moment and anticipating. There's an anticipation. There's not at the last minute. It's anticipating the next turn or in the road. So I'm kind of a little bit ahead.
Ah. Yeah. Now, my metaphor differs in that there is a point in time at which everything comes together for me, but it's a little bit different to Rob's metaphor, I think. That anticipation ahead, I think, differs for me.
And I'd be very surprised if anybody had exactly the same metaphor. I don't think we did this activity last week. Just for a second, everybody think about a flower. What kind of flower is your flower? Olaf, what kind of flower is yours?
That's a devious question. The number of flowers I know is about 100 times the flowers I know English names for. So I go with a rose. It's close enough.
A rose. And John, what kind of flower is your flower?
I will think of hyacinth.
Hyacinth. And Jackie, what kind of flower is your flower?
It's called a jabera. It's like a daisy, a coloured daisy.
Oh, is that how you pronounce that word? Jabera.
Probably not. It might be something else, but you know the one I mean, yeah.
Yeah, like a South African daisy thing.
That's it, yeah.
And Rob, what kind of flower is your flower?
Yellow daisy.
A yellow daisy. Great, thank you. So a very quick illustration. A simple word like flower, we all think we commonly understand what is meant by a flower. And yet when you ask a single clean language question about that flower, everybody's flower turns out to be different. And you do this in a room with 50 people, you'll find there will be 3 people at least who say rose. But then you ask them what kind of rose, and their roses will all be different. And even if you get 2 people who say, oh, it's a red rose, one red rose will be a single red rose on a stem being handed to somebody. Another red rose will be a picture in a gallery, or a rose in the UK on a gate or a flag or something like that. You never get two flowers exactly the same. And if that's true of a simple idea like a flower, how much more is it true of something complex like your metaphor for when you're learning at your best? It just seems to me a very compelling reason to just keep checking with what the other person means by their words. I noticed, for example, that I think in both Jackie's metaphor and in Rob's metaphor, you both used the word flow at a certain point. But I bet if we were to ask about what kind of flow, we'd find that the flow was different. So, Olaf, we haven't heard from you about your experience of your learning at your best.
It was extremely interesting. I went first asking the questions of Geronimo, and I posted the results in the Facebook group, so I skipped that. And then he asked me, and it was interesting because while I was thinking about the metaphor changed multiple times. So it started with me being in a dark room where the ideas are kind of spots of light, and the new ideas are sparks, and they connect in some way. And then it changed into being in a kind of light environment with clouds kind of inhibiting me from seeing something, and then the clouds again shifted into something different, which is like an out of focus lens, so that when you pay attention, or your attention is directed by some spark of idea into some direction, you focus in a different way, then you suddenly see something, connect something that you hadn't connected before.
Mm.
The way my attention plays a role, the way inspiration plays a role, that totally unfolded a new way of thinking about my learning for me. It's beautiful.
Wow.
I was also, the next thing was that I actually remember ideas connected to the people I heard them from. And I'm particularly attached to ideas, opinions, concepts I heard from people I value a lot or like a lot. And the connections to the people are actually equally or even more important than the ideas itself. So a lot of my feeling alive comes from being connected through ideas to people I know. That's also something I was totally unaware of before we did this exercise.
What a lot of learning for a short 10-minute exercise.
Yeah, it was magic.
Now, in terms of the changing of the metaphor, I'm curious, is that a sequence, as in when you are learning at your best, first it's in the dark and then it becomes light? Or is it multiple descriptions for the same thing?
Although that sounds totally weird to say, multiple descriptions of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was dark, and then I thought it was light, and then I thought it was clouds, and then there were a lot of people.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, because that's going to give us a beautiful illustration of a pattern that some people have when working with metaphor. Now, we don't know that this is true of Olaf because we've only got one example, but my experience suggests that there are a group of people who have this habit of coming up with multiple metaphors for the same thing in quick succession. The reason it's worth mentioning at this point in the process is in case you are Olaf's partner in further homework and practice. Because when you're beginning this process, it can be a bit confusing to keep up with all the changes. So mainly this I'm pointing this out for people not Olaf, to just know that some people have this habit of changing their metaphor as they go along. It's typically highly intelligent people, and it's often people who work in creative professions. That's the pattern I've noticed, and I don't know, as I say, I don't know whether this is a pattern for Olaf, but I suspect it may be.
Olaf, was having the multiple metaphors partly a result of, did you work with Geronimo?
Yep.
Of him asking what more is there about X? Or can you tell me more about this?
He was only using these questions, yes, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
It was really strange. So I remember very specifically that he asked me, what kind of clouds are those clouds? And I replied, it's hard to describe because I've never seen clouds like that for real. And I started describing them and noticed that there's some cloudy aspect to them, but it's different. And I wouldn't know a better word, because it's something that's in between me and something I want to see, that's making it blurred and unfocused and unclear. And when I direct my attention to it and want to learn more or want to connect some things, then things become clearer somehow. So the kind of whatever is in between gets clearer and more focused.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It was good.
Any other questions for Olaf? Oh, I've got a question for you, if I may. The notes that you posted, were you taking notes live in the chat window while you were having the conversation?
Yes.
Ooh, what an interesting thing to do.
So I typed what he said and he typed what I said.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some spelling correction at the end.
Mm-hmm. And by typing what each of you said, that will have slowed the process down a little bit, I suspect.
Oh, I guess we're both used to that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really, no.
Mm-hmm. So that's a convention in your professional world, is to take notes as you're having a conversation.
Especially in one-on-one conversations on Skype, I do that quite often, yes. Because when people tell stories, they're often, that was before I knew about Clean, but it somehow serves the same purpose. It's like playing back at them what they say. For instance, when you ask people to write down what they like about themselves, they will be very, very... and then when you're asking them, hey, what are you passionate about? They will tell stories and use words to describe themselves that are way more true and more amazing than they would actually use in a kind of written description about their person. And that's, for instance, one example where I've used this. So I ask people questions, they tell me a story, and I write down words they use, and then they can pick that and put it on LinkedIn.
I've not actually ever heard of anyone doing that with Clean Language in real time like that before. No reason why not. It's just I don't know of anyone who's done it. And I just think it's so elegant. So many times we'll get into a course like this, and after a few weeks people will say, well, how do you keep track of everything? How do you keep notes? How do I know what to make a note of and what not to make a note of, and so on and so forth? But the idea of making notes in real time where the other person can see them is so simple and so elegant. It will slow the process down a little bit, I suspect, for people who are not used to doing it. But there's nothing wrong with that. Sure. It can actually be a great thing to slow the conversation.
Thank you for asking that question, because I didn't know there was anything unique about that idea. I thought everybody would Skype like that. Just seemed very natural to me.
So Dave and I typed them up after the conversation from our written notes and posted them back to each other on the Skype chat page, and that worked really well. But I don't think I've enough type.
So did you practice? Oh, Jackie, your internet connection's gone a bit funny. Did you practice with Dave and with John separately?
No, just with Dave.
Sorry. I got confused about who was practicing with whom. Okay. Is there anything else to say about the activity, about the homework activity? Oh, did anyone do any asking of the 2 lazy Jedi questions outside the homework?
Yeah, I did. I don't know whether I can articulate it though. Like Olaf, I delivered some training just yesterday actually, and I used it as an opportunity to practice my lazy Jedi questions on the group, and I said that they were guinea pigs for me. Interesting. It's a group of staff who act as advisors to people who think they're being bullied or harassed, and typically people will go very quickly into blame and and be very kind of problem focused. So I kind of I started them off by asking the group, the question about if this training goes just as you would like it will be like what, and the other question about what kind of whatever is that. And in 8 out of the 10 delegates, it generated a metaphor, and in the 2 people it didn't. It was because one of that pair is a very logical person, and she just the metaphor thing. Use that as a discussion tool around perhaps using that sentence when people come and because if you've got an hour or something with that person and they're very immersed in the problem, the time kind of sweeps away. And if they were to ask that question, so if this session goes exactly as you would like, it would be like what, and what kind of whatever is that it would generate a different kind of language. And we also talked about how Language is a really blunt tool, and sometimes if you're immersed in an issue, it can be very hard to articulate what it is that you mean, whereas a metaphor does in a way that you couldn't articulate in any other. And the group was just blown away by it, and so was I. The power of those two questions was just extraordinary. And we had a whole conversation around, how mad the sentence looked written down, and to deliver it confidently. And when they did deliver it confidently, as though it was the most normal thing in the world to say, they got the best results. They got less good results when they themselves were quite hesitant with the language. So there was something there about just saying it as though it's absolutely normal. And people just respond without thinking then. So there's loads of learning for me. I thought it was fabulous.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's very exciting.
I did that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
One person responded, it was like hopping from one thing to the next or jumping around.
Mm-hmm.
And then another person responded, well, it was like juggling balls. And it was interesting because the next time I talked to the person who had mentioned juggling, he used the same metaphor in response, and he says, well, I'm not juggling as many balls today.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing? So it was interesting that he I guess there was enough rapport, or he had there was the continuity of the same metaphor.
Mm. It's interesting. People do stick with the same metaphors for a long time. One of my favourite stories is the first day I actually met David Grove, the creator of Clean Language. I happened to witness him meeting somebody for the first time in 20 years who had been a demonstration client with him at a workshop he'd run all those years before. Oh, hello, Joe. How's your crazy paving? He asked. And I asked her afterwards what he was talking about. And she said that, crazy paving had been the metaphor that she'd used in that demonstration all those years ago. And it had turned out to be a really important metaphor in her life, that whenever she was putting together a new life in various ways, crazy paving had been the metaphor. And she'd later moved into a house with a crazy paving garden. And it kept recurring as a metaphor in her life. So when David said, how's your crazy paving? She was able to give him a perfectly reasonable answer 20 years on.
Fascinating.
And that's not necessarily true of every metaphor that everybody uses every time, but it's certainly true of a lot of metaphors. And of course, the more you direct someone's attention to a particular metaphor, the more it becomes potentially an important metaphor for them, which is an issue we'll come back to.
I've noticed, this is Rob, that with metaphors in the context of clean language class and learning, I'm typically using my metaphors to add more clarity and specificity. Yet sometimes in my day-to-day world, before discovering clean language, I would also use it to be general and vague on purpose. So I'm just noticing for me the power of using it for either extremes of my purposes.
Yeah, you can be vague by using a metaphor, and you can be extremely specific by using a metaphor.
Interesting, yeah.
It's like the first level of the metaphor is as you do the person into the specificity. Yeah. It reminds me of NLP, the structure of experience. You're really getting down into the structure of somebody's experience by kind of helping them to explore that metaphor, and you can get such clarity, I think, from helping them to do that.
Mm. And just to pick up on this notion of directing attention, the questions can be used to get drilled down into the detail, and to open up into the generality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It depends what you ask the question of. So if somebody was to say, oh, it's like, let's take it away from Joe's crazy paving and say it's just like decking. Something is like decking. You could ask what kind of decking, and they would say, oh, it's made of wood and it's painted brown. Is there anything else about that wood? So they say, oh, it's oak or it's maple or whatever. Let's say it's oak. And when it's oak, what kind of oak? And you're getting more and more detailed about the ins and the outs of the decking. And then you can draw the attention back out. And when it's oak decking like that and it's brown, that decking, is there anything else about decking like that? Do you see how that opens the lens, if you like? And they'll say, oh, well, it's decking and it's about 20 feet by 20 feet. And when it's decking and it's 20 feet by 20 feet, is there anything else about decking like that? And then you might ask other questions like whereabouts is decking and things like that, to open out the lens wider and wider and wider. And then you can direct the attention back in again. And it's decking and it's 20 feet by 20 feet and it's oak and it's brown. What kind of brown is that brown? So that there's a beautiful elegance in how you can go to the detail and open up to the big picture. The better you get with asking these questions, the more you can get good at directing attention to the detail or the big picture.
And it's about these repetitions, right? Because you're kind of walking through the metaphor,
Mm-hmm.
up and down, left and right. So if you just allow us to use the two questions, it's hard to direct attention to something that's like far away from the current element of the metaphor.
Yes, in order to direct attention to the bigger picture, you probably need to take the person to the very largest picture you have, and then go, is there anything else?
Yeah, and I assume it's in the steps, right? So the steps are very gentle in like going back or going in. And if you asked about the brown before and then you ask, is there anything else about the decking? Then people will be like, oh yeah, I talked about the decking.
Yeah, so gently stepping between the different things and reminding people about the different elements is an important part. Now, we're not going to get into the detail of how to do that today, but you get the general picture that it can be done.
Yeah, thank you. That was a beautiful example of how this repetition is important and what for. And that was an aha moment to me.
Thank you. And I'm sort of pulling us back. I'm pulling our attention back to the agenda of today's call, which is this question of directing attention. The reason for looking at it, I think I said a moment ago, is that basically the clean language questions are precision tools for directing attention. That's what they do. Every time you ask a clean language question, you direct a person's attention in a particular way. And the reason that works is really, really simple. What happens when you are asked a question?
You go inside your head. Well, I do.
And?
Search around for the answer. Try and connect it with stuff you already know.
So for most people, when they're asked a question, they go inside their head and they search around to try and find an answer. And that's true whether or not they actually intend to say their answer out loud. Even if they think it's a rhetorical question, they still go inside and ask and look for the answer. And I just think that's an amazing thing. Until I came across clean language, I had never really realized that that was the process that happened pretty much whenever anyone was asked a question. It's almost as if you can't not seek the answers to a question. Which gives the questioner an amazing amount of power, in my opinion.
Yeah.
If by asking a question, you are directing a person's attention to go inside and try and find the answer, you as the questioner are pretty much taking the person's attention and pushing it wherever you want it to go. Which gets me very agitated when people talk about clean language being about not influencing. Because for me, when people are asking questions with that degree of precision, they are influencing at a very, very profound level.
Mm-hmm.
If I can take your attention and direct it to either the good stuff, the happy stuff in your life, or the depressing stuff, the miserable stuff in your life, what does that mean? For me, it means that because where your attention goes, your energy flows, it means that by asking particular questions, I can change your emotions. I can make you happier and I can make you sadder by asking specific kinds of questions. And if that isn't influence, I don't know what is. Sorry, it's a pet subject and I'm on a rant, but am I making sense?
Totally, and it's like one thing that just got boom for me was I recently read in some, I think it was a nonviolent communication book, a story about a woman who was meeting an intruder at night in her room. So somebody was coming into her room at night, intending to rob her or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And she woke up, and the first thing she did without really thinking was asking him, "What time is it?" Which then started an actual conversation, leading to, I think, some totally different outcome, which was not violent.
Mm-hmm.
And you just gave me an important bit of understanding why that works. Because A, she directed his attention to something that was totally out of his intention space, and being asked for something you're entirely confident on and comfortable with, and offering this kind of specific vulnerability. She was treating him as an equal, not offending him, not treating him as a bad person. And that totally changed the dynamic of that situation. But the questioning was the first thing, and you just explained how that works. Thank you.
Mm. And of course, that's a very, very rich story with lots of things we could talk about in that. But yeah, it just works, doesn't it? You're directing the person's attention not to the fact that they're afraid or the fact that they are about to attack you, but to something highly neutral. What time is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rob, I think I saw you pressing your mute button. Does that mean you're about to say something?
Yes, it reminds me of a question that I asked someone years ago. It was actually a yoga class in an office building at a corner of a kind of a downtown, somewhat dangerous environment, and a person we call probably someone without a home living on the street wandered in, and I think it was a small class, and the women, I think there were just 2 men and a few women, and you could feel the fear in the room rise. And we were all on the ground doing pose, and he was standing up, and I just looked up and said, "Sir, it's time to go now." And he just had a dazed look. He looked around and kind of smiled and left. And it's that same kind of redirection that was so simple, and I don't think he came in to just leave.
Who knows?
So it is very powerful.
And I wonder if it had been a question, what question could it have been, rather than a statement? But there's so much we could play with there. And if we use Jackie's example of people who are getting coaching, counselling because they're being harassed, or they believe themselves to be being bullied and harassed, what happens if you take that person's attention to what they would like, rather than the bullying and the harassing, which is what they're expecting to come in and talk about? And think about that. If you've got an appointment with somebody to talk about it, you've probably done nothing but think about it for 2 or 3 days. How awful your experience is, and how you're going to have to tell the story of your awful experience. Being asked, well, what would you actually like, is probably the last thing on your mind.
Yeah, that's it. We talked about maybe trying and what would you like to happen instead, after they've kind of, and then using that to explain that. It was just so powerful.
Mm-hmm. So to come back to that question, what would you, and what I call the power switch question, I don't think we went into it in deep detail last time, did we?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so.
No, because that's one of the ones I really want to spend a bit of time on tonight, which is the question that I call the power switch question. And we'll come back to in a second. But the idea of asking, and when problem, in their words, what would you like to have happen? Or what would you like instead? Can be incredibly powerful. Shall I pop that question on the screen if I can find a slide with it on?
Yeah.
Hang on. I can drop it in the chat window as well. Okay, there's the chat window. Now I can do share screen as well. So hopefully, now what I'm not sure, can you see my PowerPoint slide there? So
yeah,
the power switch goes like this. You listen as they describe the problem, and then you ask, and when their problem, in their words, what would you like to have happen? Now, often that question will take their attention to what they would like. Not always. So I always say, do listen to their answer. Have they actually said what they would like? If not, repeat the question, or consider repeating the question. Because there's so much. So, for example, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody again. Somebody who has been bullied and is very distressed about it might well need asking this question 2 or 3 times. It takes a little, it's like small steps, like we were saying before, to take someone's attention from the grimmest stuff in their world through to what they actually want is not a 2-minute job, typically. You can need to ask it more than once. But it is definitely worth a try. It just works. Are you up for doing a quick activity in the group now?
Sure.
For this activity, each person's going to need a small problem, maybe even two, that they're currently experiencing in their life, at the level of, I haven't done the washing up, that kind of problem. So have a think and come up with a small problem that you can use in this activity that you don't mind sharing with the other members of the group. And then what we're going to do is go round the four of you in a circle, each of you taking turns to say your problem and then be asked the power switch question. So I'd better pop the slide back on the screen so that you can see the power switch question for the activity. Has everybody got a small problem? Give me a wave if you have got a question. Yes, yes. For whatever reason, I suddenly can't see you, Olaf. Have you got a small problem?
Yes, I'm not sure if it's small, but yeah.
You've got a something, great. So let me put you in a circle. I'm going to put Jackie at 12 o'clock. I'm going to put John at 3 o'clock, Rob at 6 o'clock, and Olaf at 9 o'clock. And the way we're going to go is Olaf's going to give his problem first. Then Jackie's going to ask the question. Then Jackie's going to give her problem. And John's going to ask the question. Then John's going to give his problem and Rob's going to ask the question. Then Rob's going to give his question and Olaf's going to ask the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So all we're going to hear is the statement of the problem, one question, and then the answer to the problem. And then we're going to move around.
And this is Rob. So there's the statement of the problem, and then the question is directed to the person who stated the problem?
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Olaf, would you state your question and Jackie be ready to ask your question?
Yes. The problem is that we need to file our tax return this week, and there's one important document that we have been searching for the past weekend and sometime before occasionally, and we can't find it. I'm not sure if this problem is a good example for this exercise, but let's give it a go.
Okay, and when you have to file your tax return and you have this document and you've been searching around and you can't find it, what would you like to have happen instead?
I would like to have an idea where to look for it, because I think we've searched everything twice already at least.
Excellent. Great example. Thank you very much. Jackie, have you got a problem? And John, are you ready to ask the question? Have you got it written down, by the way, John? Or can you see the chat?
I see the chat, I don't see the question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have it written down.
You got it written down. And when problem, what would you like to have happen?
What would you like to happen?
Yeah. Okay, Jackie, off you go.
Okay, so I'm very disorganized and I keep losing things.
Okay, and that's the problem. What would you like to have happen when you're very disorganized and keep losing things? What would you like to have happen instead?
John, can I ask you to try it in the way that it's originally said? So, and when problem.
And when you're disorganized, very disorganized, and you keep losing things, what would you like to have happen instead?
I like to have more order and some method to where I put certain things.
Great, thank you. Thanks both. And John, have you got a problem? And Rob, have you got a question?
I have a problem. I'll tend to overschedule myself or think I can get more done than I can actually do.
So, John, when you overschedule yourself and think you can get more done than you can actually do happens, what would you like to have happen?
I'd like to slow down a little bit and take a more realistic perspective.
Thank you. And who have we got left? We've got, it's Rob problems next and Olaf asking the question, yeah?
I need to call the storage place and schedule a time to have someone open it for me tomorrow, but I'm not sure how to guess when I can pick my friends up at the airport and actually be there.
So when you need to call the storage place to go there tomorrow, and you don't know when you can be there because you need to pick your friends up at the airport, what would you like to have happen?
I would like the person at the storage pod to be flexible and just say, call me when you're on your way.
Lovely.
Lovely.
Nicely done. Now, is that everybody? Have we gone all the way around? I've lost track.
Yes.
I think we have. Great. So, what did you notice when you were asked the question?
It does take you out of the problem state and into a solution focus, I think.
Anyone different to that?
I saw that with the others, but it didn't work for me because it was just this negating thing. Like, I can't find it. I want to find it.
Mm-hmm.
That was,
Now, what I heard from you, Olaf, as well as from the others, is you went from a statement to a statement of desire. So each response began, I would like.
Mm-hmm.
Or whereas the original problem statement didn't begin, I would like. Now, whereas being asked one question doesn't necessarily solve the problem, what I think I heard was a shift of attention from what was wrong to what you would like.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And that's the purpose of the question. Rob, you were about to say something.
I was, and I've forgotten it for the moment. My attention shifted somewhere else.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I don't know whether it's relevant, but my problem was at an identity level. So I said, I am very disorganized and I keep losing. So when I went into the solution focused, I said, I would like to be, or I'd like more order, and whatever I said. So I shifted from the statement into, what's that relevant?
Mm.
Yes, it is. You're right. You said, I want order. You didn't say, I want to be something.
Yeah.
When you focused on the positive bit.
Yeah, because if I'm making an identity statement, I am disorganized, then that's big, isn't it? But I'm kind of chunking it down to, I want order, rather than it's about me, it's about having order. I don't know if I'm making any sense at all here.
It puts it in a different, to me, it puts it in a different frame.
Yeah.
Mm. The
Well,
identity.
then,
Go ahead, Rob.
Going from identity, which is that of large core level, just to a specific way of acting, it certainly makes it more smaller and probably more immediately easily solvable than changing your identity, unless in solving that immediate problem of being organized now, you realize, I can also be an organized person now.
Yes.
You've got me wondering now, does the question necessarily imply an answer which is not an identity statement? And I'm not sure. I know I've had that question answered with identity statements in the past. So people will answer, I want to be the kind of person who is organized sometimes. So it's not a universal that people will go from an identity statement in problem to a more small chunk solution. But there's certainly a hint of that in the question, isn't there? Something that you would like is almost necessarily separate from you.
So the question is not what would you like to be? The question is what would you like to have happen? So that's more realistic, I think.
So when you start to pull these questions apart, you'll notice that they're never completely clean. There's no such thing as a completely clean question. Every question has some presuppositions in it. This one assumes there is something that you would like.
And that something will happen.
And that something potentially could happen. So again, it's back to this. Don't tell me that clean language is in any way uninfluential. It might even be the biggest con out there. By saying that it's clean, it's conning people into believing it's not influential, when in fact you're influencing people very profoundly. So there's a lot in these questions. Now, this question in particular is one of those where people say, hang on a moment, that question sounds funny. Why is it worded like that? And there are a couple of reasons why it's worded like that. The first reason is that it works. So the reason the question is phrased in the order that it is, so just to go back to what John was almost asking, if you change the order of the question and you ask, what would you like to have happen when problem, you get a very different result. So if you ask, and when problem, what would you like to have happen? It simply works differently. So David and the people who were working with him at that time tested and tested and tested and tested and tested to work out which version of the question worked more effectively, more time to get what they wanted. Now, I've suddenly got a horrible echo. So I'm going to quickly mute everybody in the hope that will make the echo go away. But it's not making the echo go away, or is it? Yes, the echo's gone away. So fingers crossed, that's the end of the echo for a minute. And now I'm going to unmute you all. And the chances are it will have gone. No, it's not gone. So I'm going to mute everybody again. I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself one time. Okay, so Jackie, would you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Can you still hear me? Have we still got an echo? No, we're good. John, would you unmute yourself? John, would you unmute yourself, yeah?
Okay, I have unmuted myself.
Great, and we don't have an echo. Olaf, would you unmute?
Yes.
I suspect that's where the echo.
I didn't hear it
Yeah, the echo's coming when you unmute yourself, Olaf. So would you mute yourself for now? And Rob, could you unmute yourself? Oh no, it's on the screen. I think I have to unmute you. There we go.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Yeah, that's
1, 2,
working,
3.
isn't it? Yeah, so I think the echo is on Olaf's connection, but I'm not quite sure why. If you stay muted for the time being and then unmute yourself when you need to talk, that should make it work. So where were we? This question of what would you like to have happen? Another little detail that I didn't emphasize before, but is actually very important. When you ask this question, the version of it that works best is, and when problem, what would you like to have happen? So really emphasize the word like. It makes a huge difference to how the question is received. And the third thing to mention about this question is that to have happen. It sounds a bit odd. Why would anyone ask, what would you like to have happen, instead of what would you like instead? Well, the reason is twofold. One is that David found that when people were asked, what would you like to have happen, they became less bothered about whether they could make it happen or not. So the old NLP question, for those of you who've done NLP, what do you want, seems to imply to people that they are expected to make it happen. This question, what would you like to have happen, suggests that it can happen without them having to make it happen, and that makes a big difference. The other thing about this question, from David's point of view, was that he liked the way it sounded. He liked the rhythm. What would you like to have happen? It seemed to him had a much more elegant rhythm, and it just landed in a way that worked better. So that's the way the question ended up. So by all means, in conversation, use it in the form and when problem, what would you like instead? But if you want to do the whole hypnotic, trancey, clean languagey thing, and when problem, what would you like to have happen, is the version that works the best. So in all of that, is there anything else you noticed when you asked that question or were asked that question? It just seems to direct attention. It just seems to work. So I'm just thinking there are probably a couple of bits and pieces that I need to remember to say. Oh yes, I was talking earlier about safety precautions when working with metaphor. And this question is my life belt. This question is the question to write on a Post-it note or a sticker and stick on the side of your computer so that you have it at the tip of your tongue when you need it. It's the question to practice, practice, practice. So you know that when you need to ask this question, you can do it without needing to find the right piece of paper. The reason for that probably is quite obvious by now. If this question has the property of taking the person's attention and shifting it from what they don't want and towards what they do want, it's very handy whenever you're working in a context of change, particularly when you're first learning clean language. If you should find yourself working with a client and they are paying attention to the problem, what's going to happen to their emotional state?
Yeah.
It's going
the physiology. Yeah. The physiology is going to reflect that particular, if it's something horrible, they're going to be in it.
Mm-hmm. They're going to get into it. You're going to hear it in their voice. You're going to see it in their body language. And they might even tell you, this is really horrible. I'm really not enjoying this. Now, there are occasions later in your clean language learning that you might want to do that to people. Right now, I'd strongly suggest it's not the most helpful place to start. When people are upset, they become much less capable of helping themselves. They become stressed. They lose touch with resources that they ordinarily would be able to access. So, as a facilitator, keep this question to hand so that if someone gets upset, you can instantly go, and when it's upset and it's horrible and you're not enjoying this, what would you like to have happen? Or what would you like to have happen instead? And you're instantly taking their attention out of the grim stuff and into what they want. There's a story I often tell from a student of mine called John, who, when he first practiced clean language, having read my book, tried it out with a woman who was then his girlfriend, and got her right into a deep metaphor for something that was violently unpleasant to her. She was in floods of tears. He didn't know what to do. And it was just grim as a grim thing on grim day. He didn't know about this question. He needed this question. He didn't remember it. If he'd ever read it, he didn't remember it. They split up not long afterwards, and it may have something to do with it. The whole incident happened in Germany. It did happen in English, but she was a German speaker, come to think of it. So maybe language had something to do with it, but I don't think so. I think if he'd had this question, I think he'd have done a lot better. Nowadays, he's happily married to a completely different girl, so all's well that ends well. But do keep this question by you. If people get upset, it's the one to ask. Does that make sense? Any questions about that question, about how you might use it?
No.
Rob?
Well, this is Rob. Just on that scenario, I've noticed in conversation with some people, it seems like the majority of us, we do go to the problem state and can't see what we want or get out of it. Yet there are sometimes a pattern where in certain situations, certain people seem to be expert at avoiding the problem and just forgetting it and ignoring it and not ever checking in with what's true so that they can kind of notice where they are. And I'm just wondering if that impacts this strategy.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely true that that's the case. And later on in this course, we will look at those kind of situations. Dealing with those kind of things cleanly is regarded as pretty advanced. So there are two particular situations that are talked about like what you've just described. One is self-denial, self-deceit, and self-deception. And the other is where there are binds operating. Dealing with both those situations cleanly is regarded as very advanced. So we will touch on, certainly on binds later on in this course. So I'd ask you to hold that question until about call 9, 8 or 9. Is that okay? For the time being, because you're just starting, start out with going for the good stuff. Start out by looking for metaphors for things that people want, because that'll make it easier for you to practice, make it more comfortable for you and for the people around you who you're practicing with, whether it's your friends, your family, or your colleagues.
So those other three issues, the self-denial, self-deceit, and the other one,
Mm-hmm.
Are we covering that on this programme? That sounds really interesting.
I hadn't intended to. I will send you a link. I'll share a link to an article on Penny Tompkins and James Lawley's website about it.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll share an article. Realistically, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do anything sensible with it. It's a bit too much to fit into a 90-minute call. Even doing binds is going to be a bit challenging. But have a look at the article, have a read, and if in a few weeks' time you're still interested in playing with that, give me a nudge and let's see what we can do with it.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Rob?
Yes, thank you. That's powerfully interesting for me. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'm realizing that we're rapidly running out of time, and I need to set the homework. So let me get quickly onto that. 2 pieces of homework. Once again, there's 1 piece of homework for you in your own situations, and 1 piece of homework for you to team up with other members of this call and work in pairs. So the first piece of homework for you to do privately: use the power switch question and notice the effects. So you can do that whenever you hear someone moaning or complaining. Now, this is obviously going to be a lot easier to do in the UK than it is in America, because you never hear anybody moaning in America, do you?
Yeah, right. As long as I have the on hold, yeah. If I've got them muted, I don't hear it, or myself muted, my own mind muted, I don't hear it.
Yeah, so you can use it on yourself as well. That could be good fun to hear about that. So if you hear yourself moaning and complaining, ask yourself what you would like to have happen. And just notice what happens and report back in the online community. Anytime you've got an opportunity, use the power switch, notice the effects, notice what happens, and ask more questions if you like, but that's the one to pay attention to this time. And the second piece to do, oh dear, hang on a moment, I've lost my PowerPoint. There we go. The second thing to do in your pairs, person A speaks briefly about a minor problem they have, the same kind of level we were doing in the call just now. Person B uses the power switch as many times as necessary until person A says what they would like instead. So as soon as you hear a statement which begins with the words "I would like," or "I need," or "I want," something like that lets you know they're stating a positive, then ask a few lazy Jedi questions about what they would like. A maximum of 10 minutes each. And do please put a timer on it, so you don't run over 10 minutes. Usually in the future I'll be saying don't stop before your time, but this time it's a maximum time, maximum of 10 minutes each. I'll post those details in the online group when we finish. And when all of that, are there any questions about the homework?
No.
What I'm going to suggest is that you, the 4 of you, team up together and don't work with the same person you worked with last week. So that means John and Rob not to work with each other, mix and match. And then I will message Dave and Geronimo and ask them to work with each other.
Yeah.
Olaf, do you happen to know when Geronimo's back from... Well, he's got an internet connection. It's just not working at the moment.
That's what I assume. I have talked to him before when he was in Spain. So
yeah, so he's not on holiday in somewhere obscure on top of a mountain. He's just not got internet at the moment.
That's how I understood him, yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll message him and Dave and ask them to team up on a call together. So
Rob,
when all of... Sorry?
Rob, do you want to pair up with me?
Certainly.
So John, we'll pair up.
Okay.
Great.
So I'm going to, in a moment, stop the recording so you guys can exchange any contact details you need to and talk diaries. But before that, any last questions before we finish for this week?
Thank you. That's
in which case,
great.
I look forward to seeing you same time again next week. Thank you very much indeed, and have fun with the homework.
Thank you.